All right, hi. Hi, everyone, and welcome back from the keynote. Our next session is on reframing public policy. Our keen listeners from our last year's discussion will recognize that this discussion builds on the idea that we discussed last year that gender blind is not gender equal. This year, we will explore how gender-targeted policy measures have created significant opportunities for women to be engaged in the workspace. Moderating this panel is the co-host for our conference today, Rabia from CAS Japan, who is also working on a 9-country study to empower women run small and medium-scale businesses and how to scale them. Rabia, over to you and your illustrious panel. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Anish, for your kind words. A warm welcome from my side to all our panelists, to our audience across the many time zones today. It has been such a pleasure to listen to the various panels yesterday and today and to see how wonderful the conference is picking up speed. And now it is our task to hold up the excitement, I think. I have the honor to moderate this session today while representing the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Our 120 offices across the globe have one mission, and that is democracy. And within our rule of law and good governance programs, we support women in economy, politics, society, and work towards equal chances. Equal chances have a lot to do with policies. And policies come into play when certain developments have to change or need a different direction. Just yesterday, we heard from Ipsita Katuria that culture, leadership, and policies might be or are the key for change. In our panel, Reframing Public Policy, we look into the opportunities which existing policies and strategies have to offer to make equity the norm, which is precisely our slogan for today's panel. We have got 60 minutes and I'm looking forward to our audience's questions. Be warmly invited to intensely discuss with our panelists. We have to admit that there is a decisive amount of legislation that has been created so far. Putting this into force in practice is yet another issue. Our session today will highlight on the ongoing favorable policy developments that already are gender focused. And while building on the last conference that gender blind is not gender equal, as Anish rightly said, this session will explore gender targeted policy measures that have created significant opportunities for women to be engaged in the workforce and beyond. I am joined today by 3 global experts who lead policy formulations and dialogues and who helped us to understand which kind of policies have produced the best progress yet and in what kinds of environments these have happened. So please allow me to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Annemarie Ryrinc, who is a renowned gender specialist with extensive experiences in Asia. Gender equality, women's economic empowerment, youth employment, and child labor has been her focus for 15 years. She supports DFAT since 2013, but prior to this assignment, she was engaged with the International Labour Organization and the United Nations Development Programme in Southeast and South Asia. Annemarie will focus on governance aspects during our discussions. Prabjot Khan works in ADB's Gender Equality Thematic Group and provides support for the implementation, monitoring and reporting of the ADB's policy on gender and development. And she works on the strategy's 2030 gender equality and the current Women's Empowerment Operational Plan. A few milestones of this plan she will introduce to us today. And for the past 16 years, she has been working in the field of gender mainstreaming and social development. Last but not least, Professor Mikiko Eto, also joining from Tokyo like me today, is one of the leading gender equality activists of Japan. Her main subject is gender in politics, and she has recently been involved in a comparative research project on gender equality in Asian parliaments, which is co-hosted by the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Singapore. The project is aimed to reveal the extent to which and how MPs in 9 countries and in this region acted for gender equality and whether their presence in the parliament could make a difference. And we will hear from her some of the findings in this panel. So now I will come to our session. Many international and regional organizations like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, DFAT, USAID have made gender parity a priority in their policy advice to governments across the world. And yet the world sees so much disparity. Interestingly, the disparity is found in developed and developing countries in G7, see Japan and G20 states alike. As per the latest World Economic Forum report, it will take the world another 100 years to reach gender parity. And within these average figures, some regions will take much, much longer, while some may achieve it in less than 100 years from now if we progress at the current rate. Having all this said and being time sensitive, let us dive into our opening statement. I will start with Prabjot Khan, and I like to have you on stage now and like to ask you the following question, Prabjot. Every year, the World Economic Forum produces a countrywide gender gap report, which with specific areas of gap. What have been some of the more popular policies of governments across the world, across Asia, to bring down the gender gap? Can you share with us some details about how impactful or not these policies have been and what can be done by policymakers to enhance the pace of change? So over to our first statement. Prabjot, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rabia. First of all, thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to this panel. The topic is very, very important for all of us who are working on gender equality. You mentioned about gender gap. We know that despite Asia's gain in gender equality and women's empowerment in past decades, inequality still exists and progress has been uneven. For example, maternal mortality rates and life expectancy of women have improved significantly over the last 50 years. Education gender gaps have been reduced, if not reversed, in certain countries. But this region is still the region where the declining workforce participation is there. And according to ILO, women in Asia work the longest hours in the world when their paid and unpaid work is combined. This is also the region where women are concentrated in the informal economy, 60%, and in vulnerable jobs and digital transformation of the economy. Women's jobs are also at greater risk of being eliminated. Women wages are equivalent only to 77% of men's wages, with huge variations across countries and sectors. And a key challenge to gender equality is the persistence of discriminatory social norms, which drives harmful practices such as early marriage. Rates of gender-based violence remains high, with 60% of women in certain countries reporting some some form of intimate partner violence. We should not also forget that we are in post-pandemic times now, and there has been an impact of COVID-19 on gender equality, and gender gaps have actually been exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, ADB came out with a brief title, COVID-19 is no excuse to regress gender equality, in which we identified 3 areas where COVID-19 was already making gendered effects through. The first and the foremost one was on the women's employment patterns, because women were more in informal employment, in health and service sector, that it impacted, and the lower wages of women. The second was on women's unpaid household work and care, which increased due to COVID-19 and school closures. And third was social and cultural norms that pushed more girls out of school, with increased time spent on home, leading to higher domestic violence. At the same time, recently in 2021, ILO has estimated that 30 million more women in employment compared to, pre-pandemic levels. And it is also estimated by UNESCO in 2021 that 11 million girls may not, ever return to school globally because of the pandemic. So we are in these times. I think it is important to, reaffirm our commitment to gender equality. I will, take a pause here and go back to ADB's commitment on gender equality and elaborate on the operational plan that you mentioned in your introductory remarks. ADB has more than 20 years of history of working on gender. Our policy on gender and development actually came in 1998. With this policy, we have recently, in 2018, our strategy 2030 came into, was approved, and it has 7 operational priorities, and accelerating progress on gender equality was one of the operational priority. This priority recognizes that gender equality is critical in its own right, as well as for helping to realize socioeconomic development of the region. In this strategic, ADB strategy 2030's operational priority, we have identified actually 5 areas where, where we would work on with the countries, and the countries also need to work on, which actually identifies the breadth of prevailing gender issues in Asia Pacific region and the spectrum of issues that, that ADB would also work on with the government, which actually answers your question. The first and foremost is women's economic empowerment. And this includes, quality jobs for women and high value added entrepreneurship opportunities for women, reducing concentration of women in low paid segments and sectors in the labor market. Second is gender equality in human development. So we've seen that gender equality in human capital development, there have been some gains, but we still need to work more. Health, social protection, if we want to unleash full talents of women and girls. And if we want to effectively address different needs of women and men in responding to new challenges such as aging, youth bulge, rapid migration, and future of work. Third is gender equality in decision making and leadership. We see that we had a lot of representation of women in project related consultations and representation, but how to move that to higher up, how we can scale these interventions, linking with larger scale institutional legal reforms, shifting from consultation to meaningful participation of women to garner public decision making. At the same time, women's leadership development to enable tangible changes in public resource allocation, urban and rural infrastructure design, and public service delivery. The fourth one is on the women's time, poverty, and drudgery reduce. So women, have dual responsibilities for paid work and domestic care work, and their disproportionate time use on the latter continue to disadvantage women in building human capital and participate in economic activities. So we need to invest, in programs that reduce actually women's unpaid care work. And finally, for the fifth point, I think it also is the final point, because we recently saw at the COP 26 as well, there is much focus on climate change and gender equality. For this, I think this preventing and coping capacity of women is more limited than that of men, that we have to recognize in the event of external shocks and risk. And that's why, this becomes one of the priorities. So these are the, different priorities of the region that in terms of policy we should focus on. I earlier mentioned that there has been some progress in the education sector. I think there have been some progress, but this progress has been unequal. For example, we see in terms of STEM and transition to work, women tend to lag behind the men. And in pandemic context, this has been there has been a real risk of backtracking in terms of girls' education, as UNESCO's data highlights. So what kind of policies we need, I will just quickly give one example from one of the ADB project is we have to look for some policies that actually we have to look at actually the sector policies, and within that how we can gender mainstream that, how we can make it gender responsive. For example, our program in from the Kingdom of Cambodia, second urban secondary education sector development program, has commitment for a gender mainstreaming strategic plan in education which looks at different aspects of gender analysis, gender responsive pedagogy and materials, and to make education free of gender bias, gender responsive school environment, professional development targeted to female staff. And these are some of the ideas, for positive policies that we can look into. With this, I will close my opening statement. Thank you so much. Over to you, Rabia.
Thank you very, very much. That was quite a tour de force. We will pick up on the education point and the COVID repercussions in the later rounds. Thank you very much, Prabjot, for giving us these already positive examples. I would like to turn now to Annemarie Ryrinc, and ask you the following question. Gender gaps persist in all areas. We have political leadership, economic engagement, health and education. The areas that see maximum progress is probably education. So Annemarie, could you help us to enlighten us on what factors helped governments to close the gender gap in this, and what have been some impactful public policies initiatives in this area?
Thank you very much, Rabia, and thank you to the organizers of this conference for inviting me to speak. And good morning and good evening to all of you, wherever you find yourselves in the world. Before I start answering your question, I do actually want to quickly do an Australian tradition, and that is to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land from which I am speaking to you today. That's the Ngunnawal people, and I want to pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. This is our practice in Australia to do justice to the traditional owners. So on your question, in my work as Senior Gender Advisor for the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, I do see a wide cross-section of public policies and as well as work on opportunities to improve them. And this is part of my job to implement the Australian government's strategy on gender equality through our overseas engagement. We have a COVID-19 response policy for our development assistance, which is called Partnerships for Recovery, and it has a strong focus on gender equality and meeting the needs of the most vulnerable, many of whom are women and girls. Now, it's true that in our region, we have seen some impressive strides in narrowing gender gaps in education in the past decade, particularly in the area of attendance and enrollment. And I am just delighted that Prabjot already did such an excellent job on covering so much ground. So I don't think it will come as a surprise when I then follow that by saying that while there has been progress, it hasn't been in all aspects of education, but all levels of education and for all women and girls. And many barriers remain, especially for the poorest girls and young women at all levels, I should say. And there are still such barriers as violence in and around schools, the absence of sanitation facilities, poor learning outcomes and disincentives through lack of qualified female teachers, for example, and then, of course, discriminatory attitudes at home by parents. And all of these factors combine to result in a high proportion of out-of-school youth being girls and young women. And as Prabjot already said, the COVID pandemic has only accentuated these gaps, as well as many others, and I'm sure we'll get to that too. But of course, while both boys and girls are suffering as a result of lockdowns, the ramifications for girls when they leave school early and thus end up having lesser learning outcomes are more severe, because there are long-term implications for the health and economic and social well-being for girls and their families, and that those implications are intergenerational. Now, onto your question around what have governments done well by way of public policy initiatives. And I want to go back to what is maybe a bit of an old example, but I think it's just such a telling one. That is around Bangladesh. This case holds some really interesting hints that I think we would do well to take into account. So I was looking at the World Bank's analysis of what happened in Bangladesh over the course of several decades, and that is that Bangladesh attracted more girls into the education system through increased recruitment of female teachers. And the resulting increases in girls' participation in education then contributed to reduction of early marriages for girls, which is still so prevalent, but we have seen improvements, as well as falling fertility rates. And that nicely complemented interventions in Bangladesh on family planning and reproductive health. This World Bank analysis that I was looking at also noted that increased demand for women in the labor market, in particular for women with a basic level of education in the garment industry, was a key factor in stimulating girls' education. And the government of Bangladesh responded accordingly with an increased supply of education services, because there was this demand from Bangladeshi families to educate girls now as well. So the reason I found it so interesting because you can see very clearly that it's not only about education. I mean, within this case of Bangladesh, you see emerging issues around parental attitudes, societal norms, cultural practices, and you can also see the economic opportunities. The shifts in the labor market played a big role. So I think that the lesson from this is twofold. And one is that if policymakers think through the gender implications of a particular issue, they can then differentiate manifestations of a problem from root causes and identify evidence of what has worked, borrowing potentially from other contexts, and then agree on solutions that fit their own context. And I want to lift out here that I think this is best done through gender impact assessments, both ex ante and ex post, at the policy level. And this will help to uncover existing or predicted gender differentials, both around issues that policies need to respond to, as well as around how any given policy proposal may impact differently on women and men from particular population groups. The second issue that I want to lift out is that in order to do this, we do, of course, need better gender data, meaning a more complete statistical picture of the relative situation and status of women and men of diverse backgrounds, intersecting with issues like poverty, disability, age, literacy status, etc. If we had such data and it was more consistently used to inform public policy, I think we could have the same type of important impact as was seen in the case of girls' education in Bangladesh in any and all fields. It's not only in education that this should be happening, but really in all the different fields. I'll leave it at this for now, but I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you, Rabia.
Thank you very much, Annemarie. We do a thematical cut, but we will all knit it back together. I would like to come to Mikiko-san. Are you there? Yes, Professor Ito. So the question is here for you. We look at the level of the policy makers and what can we expect from there. So Mikiko-san, Japan ranks frightfully low in the gender gap report of the World Economic Forum, the much bespoken report. Political participation for women is at its lowest. The parliament sees less and less women. The program, 30% participation in business and politics, has been postponed by a decade. What is holding up Japan? And where do policymakers go wrong? What comes in the way and what can policymakers learn from this? So I know you have prepared a comparative perspective. I leave the floor and the slides to you, Mikiko-san, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much for your introduction kindly. Yeah, let me start with this picture. Can you see this one? They are young women in Japan. They are very promising. They are attending their company's entrance ceremony. So do you think they look happy? Maybe. Yeah. One recent opinion poll shows women much more happier, much happy, not much, a little happier than men. 60% of Japanese women feel happy or very happy. On the other hand, 58% of men do so. So I think Japanese women generally feel happy and they are satisfied with their life. However, unfortunately, their public life is not so good. They are not successful in their public life. Yes, in this presentation, I talk about the correlation between the number of female MPs and gender equality policy. The Japan will present the negative example, not good, but example. Yeah, here. As you say, this is a gender gap index. The latest one, 120th among 156 countries. Yeah, it's a very low level still remains. And here, breakdown into four categories: economy, politics, health, education. So you can see education and health is not so bad. Gender gap is very small, little few points. However, economy, politics are miserable, a huge gap, especially as you said, yeah, present level of lower house, House of Representatives. Recently, just around 1 month and a half ago, we had a general election. At that time, the proportion of elected women, 9.7%, just less than 10%. Upper house is a little better, yeah, 22.4%. This is the latest one. Yeah, so yes, so this is I made a mistake. This is not so 2021 to 2019. Sorry, that's the latest one. So I'm very ashamed of our situation. In 1946, Japanese women first stood for general election, and at that time, 39 women were elected. The percentage is 8.4%, and at the present, only 9.7%. It's increased few points. Yeah. Next one. Yeah. What causes such kind of low representation in Japan? There are many explanations, not only one. It is very complicated. But in this presentation, I wish to attach importance to the relationship between political parties and voters' preferences, especially voters' consciousness of gender equality. So this is another opinion poll conducted by the Japan broadcasting companies, so-called NHK, just after the general election. The poll asked the respondent what they thought of the very low proportion of elected women. I told you at 9.7%. The respondent had 5 options. There are 5 options of answering. One, the proportion is too low. Second, the proportion is reasonable. Third, it is too high. It is ridiculous. I don't think so, but it is too high. And fourth, gender is not irrelevant to politics. Last one, they do not know, or they have no answer. So please see this one. Yeah, here a little bit. You cannot see this one. I will present. Yes. Sorry. 40% of the respondents answered it was too low, 42% too low, of course. And rest of around 60% didn't think so. They do not think it is too low. Yeah. Especially I'm interested in this answer. Gender is irrelevant to politics. Of course, it is reasonable and too high. It's ridiculous, I said. Japanese voters do not think of low percentage of elected women as serious deficit in Japanese democracy. So, and also, I'm interested in there is no gender gap in this poll. Yeah, men and women almost the same consciousness of gender or consciousness of about voting behavior. So I must say, Japanese voter seem to be not keen to increase the number of female MPs. They are lukewarm attitude. So this affects party's attitude to women's candidacy. For example, Japan's male-dominated famous party, LDP, Liberal Democratic Party. The party has only 7%, I think 8% of female membership in their party parliamentarian. So this party might think voters do not think of low level of women's representation as a serious problem. So, the party also are not interested in women's representation because women's representation issue, the issue of women's representation is not important in their polling, yeah. So even though they nominate many more women candidates, they think they do not attract Japanese voters. So just the relationship between voters' preference of gender neutrality or gender unconsciousness affect political parties' attitude towards women's candidacy. Yeah, it is a very bad circles, vicious circles.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that okay? This is a impact of women's underrepresentation on public policies. Yeah. One example is Japan's low fertility rate. It's a birth rate. It is a very low. Yeah. In 2019, the latest one, 1.36. I think this is a reflection of Japan's women's underrepresentation, because male-dominated parliament does not see women's issue as importance. So other advanced country is improved. France 1.85, Sweden the same, yeah, like that. I think Germany is now 1.6 better than Japan. Yeah. So Japan's failure in increasing the rate is a reflection of male-dominated parliaments.
Right.
Yeah, just, yeah.
Thank you very much, Mikiko-san. We come back to this.
Again, yeah, okay. Yeah,
yes, yes.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. I think you have drawn a good conclusion to what happens if females are underrepresented. That leads me to another question for the. I would like to stay in the parliamentarian public policy area. So we have had, during the election that you mentioned, Mikiko-san, we've had an interesting case in Japan where two women ran for party leadership, subsequently for the leadership of the country. And only one of them is a progressive one in terms of gender equality, being another frontrunner like you. And this let me sort of come to the conclusion that not all women necessarily support women's causes. And this question I would like to direct to Anna-Marie. Are public policies for gender parity better in countries led by women? And if yes, can you share some examples? Or I reverse the question. If no, why not? Anna-Marie, over to you.
Thank you. It is indeed a fascinating question, and we've seen a lot of interesting thinking on this topic, especially since the start of the pandemic, when observers were drawing a line from having women in the top political leadership positions to better policies, in particular in dealing with the COVID pandemic. So New Zealand, Finland, Iceland, and Germany were all lifted out and held up as examples. In my view, it's not quite so simple. I do agree with you that, of course, not all women leaders support women's causes. There are plenty of examples in history to show us this. There are also many men who are extraordinarily supportive of gender equality and have brought about major change. But we do see in some cases that women leaders can really shift the dial in terms of the culture in political leadership, also about expectations that voters have of leaders, about policy priorities, and about communication. So the key, in my view, here is that this happens much more often and much more successfully when these women leaders are not completely on their own, when they are actually joined by women at all levels of government and in public life more broadly. we do know that there is lots of research that shows that gender diversity is correlated with better governance and decreased corruption and increased support for example, public health reforms. And women's participation in governance is also linked to increased likelihood of finding common ground across political divides. And in fact, also there is strong evidence that it's linked to more sustainable outcomes from peace negotiations. But what we need to find out is actually how to accelerate the process of getting more women into political positions at all levels. We've seen some really great experiments. In fact, one example is from India, where several decades, more than 2 decades ago, a quota was instituted around having 1/3 of positions in the local governance institutions at panchayat level going to women, and that has now resulted in nearly half of the elected representatives at this level being women. And I'm sure many of our listeners will actually know a lot more about this than I do, but I do find it fascinating to hear that these women are known to bring in greater transparency and efficiency to their daily administration and implementation duties. So what I really want to emphasize here is that processes of social change take time, but they can happen and they can be accelerated. And having a woman at the top provides an example to other women that it's possible, and that it gives inspiration to younger women to aspire towards a political career. And that is really important because over time the number of women grows, and this does lead to better and more gender responsive policies. So as we say in Australia, you have to see it in order to be it. Thanks.
That was a good one. I can add a paradoxum because we, as everybody knows, Germany had a 16-year-long chancellorship performed by a woman. Angela Merkel just left office, and just now that she's gone, we have a male chancellor. The parliament is much more female now, and the cabinet is much more female now. So, of course, we live off the pressure that has been built up over the years, but I can say that having a woman chancellor did not necessarily lead to a 50% quota in the parliament, as we, of course, would have liked this. Before we move back to education, Prabjot, I would like to stick it out a little bit more in the parliament, because this is an interesting discussion that we're having here. The question is to Mikiko-san. I like to continue with your assumption or your question whether female representation leads to better policies for women. So in other words, Mikiko-san, does gender composition of public policymakers in the countries have an impact on the success of the policies for women? Can you cite some examples and tell us what others can learn from this? I know you have 1 or 2 slides prepared for this, if you can share those. Thank you. We have to be a bit more time sensitive. We have 50 minutes to go. We're all good, so please help us to enlighten us on that question. Yeah, what female parliamentarians do or don't to policies.
Yeah. This is an example of impact of women's underrepresentation on public policy. So I mentioned a single surname policy for married couples. I think your country adopt double or that, I don't know how do you say, couple can choose 2 surnames, husbands and wives, but in Japan, only 1 surname should be adopted by 1 family. So husband and men share the same surname, and the law, Japanese law, prescribes that couple can choose either husband's name or a wife's surnames. But 96% of married couple choose husband's surnames because of social pressure and their relatives' demands. However, in 1996, Advisor Council for Justice proposed new policy for selectively separate surname between married couples. So the couple in this advisory council's proposal, couple will select two different surnames, husband's one and wife's one, because recently Japanese women has increasingly participated in labor market, and some women made a good career in their business, and they wanted to continuously adopt their maiden name. So, for example, my surname, Ito, it is a maiden name, but my registered name is different because of my career making, my continuous scholarly successful. I adopt my maiden name in business scene. So many Japanese women with career or having good work wanted to adopt their maiden name. However, Japanese government hasn't adopted this advisory council proposal. The proposal has been shelved for decades. Now, more than 80% of young Japanese women do not want to change their surname after marriage. On the other hand, 70% of young men support separate surname policy. They support women's desire. Why Japanese government hasn't adopted such kind of policy? I think male MPs do not think of this situation surrounding women as a serious problem. They can continue to adopt their name after their marriage. So they do not know about problem with changing women, changing surname. So I think it is a little bit shortcut conclusion. The male-dominated ruling LDP, this is a ruling party, is reluctant to introduce a new policy because they do not think of this issue as serious issues. Yeah. This one, is that right? Okay.
Yes. So you brought rather sad examples. I have been following up that debate with interest. Coming from Europe, this seems to be 100 years ago, where we probably had this discussion. Now, Prabjot, over to you. As we heard from Annemarie, education is the maximum multiplier effect on the other aspects of parity. And we will dive back into this in a second. Many countries have achieved gender parity in education or progressed very well, but they don't see much change in economic engagement of women. And also in the study that Anish mentioned, we have sort of the same results. How can countries solve this? Do you have any leading examples for us how economic engagement, which has to do a lot with STEM probably to change it on the long run, can foster can foster advancing women in economic fields? Prabjot. Economic empowerment is the key word. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Rabia. So, as you rightly said that, there has been some, positive multiplier effects of the education. But one thing that, I would like to emphasize is that eliminating gender gaps in education has not produced equal life outcomes for women. Even in countries where schools are achieving gender equity in enrollment and in learning, women's adult outcome once they leave the school and in the labor market, in politics, and even in the households remain, very unequal. Gender inequality remains acute and deep-rooted in economic, social, and political spheres. And for this, we need to understand, why it is not transforming into female labor force participation in the workforce. And for this, I would refer to a 2016 study conducted by EDB on, female labor force participation in Asia, key trends and constraints and opportunities. And we see that a large proportion of women currently out of workforce state desire to work, but are constrained by various social and cultural norms. This is, I think, very much, within the region where we see social and cultural norms playing, much major role in the lives of men and women. So proportionately, less women enter the workforce than men and retire earlier. There is also, higher and intermediate education levels that are associated with lower female labor force participation on average. I think, except in Republic of Korea, as a women's choice to work may be related to income level, other household income, social stigma, and norms. Then female labor force participation is higher in rural areas than in urban areas, and excuse me, and the difference is partially attributed to participation in unpaid work and on family-run farms. Women, working women also experience occupational segregation and lower pay when doing the same work as men. So these are some of the issues that were identified in the in the ADB study. Corresponding to this, we have to look at what are the positive, outcomes, or where we can get positive outcomes, and what are the opportunities to improve women's labor force participation. So some of the areas that our study recommend is job quota, employment quota for women can counteract the negative effects of discrimination, provide incentives to acquire skills, and allow examples that will challenge the beliefs that productivity and suitability of certain kind of work. Then, data on vocational training reveal that women who undertake vocational training are more likely to join labor force. Then there is also criteria of job matching services that may overcome information constraints, increase employability and social networks, provide career counseling, help women bargain better for working conditions of wages. Then, the final point is on the parental leave and the flexible hours to reduce the limitation that domestic responsibilities place on female labor force participation. But how education sector can help, that is the key question. And because, we see that more and more women are getting educated, but they are not participating in the labor force. So here, I think there are 3 points to make. First is that, we are focusing too much on the supply side of education. We have to focus on the demand side of employment. That means that we have to focus on the skills, that are required in the market. The second point is regarding focus on the specific targets for women, and focus on additional employability skills for women. And one example that I can give from India itself is, one of the ADB's program, which is supporting Kerala's additional skill acquisition program in post-basic education. And this program actually focuses, it provides opportunity for the students to learn, English communication skills, basic IT skills, soft skills, and in-demand vocational courses outside the regular hours and during the vacations that equip them, young men and women to go out in the market and, be employable. So by incorporating different needs of aspirations of men and women in career counseling and training module, this program promotes gender parity in the workforce participation. I think that is the key. But one final point I want to also make here is about just transition and the need to ensure that the countries, as we shift from Paris's net zero commitments, the opportunity is taken to make sure that women are positioned and enabled to benefit from jobs in green economy, or especially related to STEM education and encouraging women into renewable jobs, etc. So this is some from my side. Thank you. Over to you, Rabia.
Thank you very much, Prabjot. That was very, very comprehensive. And that leads me to the very last question I have to ask you today, which is not coming from me, but from our audience. I apologize for the time being running out so quickly. You, Prabjot, have already probably given us the answer, but I like to have a 1 minute, if even less. That's the challenge here. Statement from you, sort of a closing statement, but the question is very suitable. What can governments do to avoid gender blind policies and promote gender equal policies? Keep it short to the point, and a sentence each so that we can close on time, but I'm sure you have exactly the right tips to say. Annemarie, I'm starting with you.
Sure. What a lovely challenge. I've already mentioned the need for gender impact assessments and also gender analysis based on data. What I think we need in addition is courageous leadership. Leadership that will actually prioritize these issues based on the evidence that we have around the disproportional impacts of the COVID pandemic, learning from good examples that are plentiful. We only have to look at, for example, the UNDP, UN Women policy tracker on gender responsive policies responding to the COVID pandemic to find good examples and to know that it is possible to use public policy to advance gender equality. It doesn't have to be large scale. Social protection policies or service delivery can be as small as nudges, but it is possible with courageous leadership that responds to the evidence that is so clear in front of us. Thank you.
We cannot hear you, Rabia. Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry. Oh, that was me, my mistake. I'm sorry. I have to close the session. I've been alerted that the time is up. I apologize for this, but
Rabia,
thank you very much, Annemarie, for wrapping us up.
Rabia, we can take a minute with Prabjot and Mikiko. We can take a minute. That's fine.
Oh, okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. It's very considerate because it would be lovely to hear them. Prabjot, over to you.
Thank
you could
you,
run
Rabia.
it down.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be very quick because I think Annemarie has, exactly pinpointed the exact point that, I also want to make. I think data is the key here. Data that's collected and analyzed separately for men and women, like sex disaggregated data. I think we need to focus much on generating sex disaggregated data because with the data, we can ensure that policy changes are gender responsive, data driven and evidence based. Without this, it's very difficult to create targeted policies for women, including efforts to promote their leadership. I think, we leaders as well as, government policymakers, they require solid evidence to understand women's need and how to meet them and how to vocalize them. So that's where, we need to emphasize on the collection and the use and promotion of sex disaggregated data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now over to Mikiko-san. How to help your government to overcome gender blindness and move to promote gender equal policies. You have 1 minute.
Okay. It's a very difficult question, but I think that civil society is very important to increase women's power, also gender equality. Yeah, so I think recently Japanese young women enhance their power in the civil society. They speak out to promote their rights and gender equality. So the more civil society enhance their power, the more Japanese democracy develops. And as a result, Japanese government will be democratic, and the proportion of women will increase. Over you. Okay.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Anish, for giving us this extra minute for the wonderful wrap up. I liked your frankness, and I liked our frank discussions that were so to the point. Thank you, TalentNomics, for the amazing partnership. So exactly today, in 2019, Ipsita and I met for the first time, and look what a strong partnership it has become. Little did we know of COVID. This is a point that we haven't even touched upon. I think this is gives us a lot of motivation to be on board next year. Thank you very much, dear audience, for tuning in, for your questions. I wish the succeeding panels good discussion, and look forward to all the upcoming subjects. Stay healthy, stay well. And thank you for having us as Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Anish, over to you.
Thank you, Rabia. Wonderful, wonderfully summed up. Mikiko-san, Prabjot, and Anna-Marie, thank you for those insightful sort of discussions. One hopes that, like we built from last year, this panel next year, we'll discuss how some of the policies that you've put in place, how have they changed gender equality and how we've moved forward. I sincerely hope to look forward to that panel going forward. With that, I'm going to end this session. Thank you very much, panelists. And we'll see you in the next session in the next 2 minutes. Thank you, everybody.
Take out time after.